Professor Richard Caldwell looked the young janitor straight in the eyes in front of 300 of the smartest people in America and said the cruelest thing a powerful man can say to a poor one. "If you fail to solve this, boy, your father cleans out his locker by Friday." The room laughed. Caldwell smiled. He had just wagered a working man's entire livelihood on the humiliation of his son, and he was enjoying it. He wanted the boy broken. He wanted him to know his place. But the janitor's son did not look away. Before we go on, if you believe that a person's worth should never be measured by the size of their bank account, then take 1 second right now and subscribe to this channel. Follow Noah's story all the way to the end, because what happens in the final part will stay with you for a long time. And leave a comment telling me what city you're watching from so I can see just how far this story has traveled tonight. Now let's begin. Nobody at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology knew the young man's name. They knew the uniform. They knew the gray cart with the squeaky wheel that rolled through the mathematics building long after the last professor went home. They knew the mop, the bucket, the quiet figure who worked in the dark while the great minds slept. But they did not know his name. His name was Noah Bennett, and he was 20 years old. And every single night he cleaned the floors of the most famous mathematics department in the country while carrying inside his head equations that would have stopped those same professors cold. Noah had learned a long time ago to be invisible. It was a skill being invisible. You learn to keep your eyes down. You learn to nod without speaking. You learned that when a professor walked past you in the hallway, the safest thing you could do was pretend you did not exist. Because in that world, a boy in a janitor's uniform was not a person. He was a function. He was the thing that made the floor shine so that important people could walk across them without noticing. His father, Marcus Bennett, had taught him that lesson without ever saying it out loud. Marcus had worked maintenance at MIT for nearly 20 years. 19 years, 7 months, and a handful of days, though nobody was counting but him. Marcus knew every pipe in that building. He knew which radiators knocked in the winter and which windows stuck in the summer. He had fixed the heating in offices belonging to men who had won the highest prizes in mathematics, and not one of them had ever asked him his name. And Marcus had never complained, not once, not in front of his son. "You keep your head down and you do your work and you go home clean," Marcus used to tell him. "A man can be poor and still be proud, but he can't be poor and stupid. So you use your head, Noah. Always use your head." Noah used his head. Oh, he used his head. Because while the professors of MIT saw a boy pushing a cart, they did not see what that boy did after midnight when the building was empty and the lecture halls were silent, and the only sound in the whole enormous place was the hum of the lights. Noah did mathematics. It had started when he was small. When Noah was 7 years old, he could look at a page of numbers the way other children looked at a picture book. Patterns leaped out at him. Shapes hid inside the numbers, and Noah could see them, and he could not understand why nobody else could. His mother, Ellen, had noticed it first. She would sit him at the kitchen table with a pencil and a stack of old workbooks she found at a thrift store, and she would watch her boy fill page after page faster than she could check the answers. "This child," she used to whisper to Marcus at night, "this child is going to do something in this world." But then Ellen got sick. It came slowly at first, and then all at once the way these things do. The doctors used long words that cost a lot of money to say. There were treatments and then more treatments, and each one came with a bill that sat on the kitchen table like a stone. Marcus took a second job, then a third, and still the stone got heavier. And by the time Ellen was gone, the Bennett family owed more money than Marcus could earn in 10 years of scrubbing floors. Noah was 16 when his mother died. That was the year college became a fantasy. That was the year the guidance counselor at his high school looked at his test scores, the highest she had ever seen, and then looked at his family's financial situation and quietly closed the folder. "There are programs," she said. "There might be some aid. But there was never enough. There was never nearly enough." And Noah watched the door to the future he was supposed to have swing slowly shut, and he understood in a cold and grown-up way that talent did not open doors, money opened doors, and he did not have any. So Noah made a decision that a 16-year-old should never have to make. He told his father he did not want to go to college. He said he wanted to work to help with the debt to be a man. He said mathematics was just a hobby, and hobbies did not pay the mortgage. He said all of it with a steady voice and dry eyes. And Marcus believed him because Marcus wanted so badly to believe him. And because the alternative was admitting that the world had already beaten his son before he had a chance to fight. But Noah had lied. Mathematics was not a hobby. Mathematics was the only thing that made him feel like he was more than the sum of his bad luck. And so when Marcus got Noah a job on the night crew at MIT, Noah did not see a janitor's position. He saw a door, a crack in the wall, a way inside the building where the greatest mathematical minds in America argued about the deepest questions in the universe. And Noah Bennett walked through that crack, and he never left. For 3 years, Noah lived 2 lives. In the day he slept. In the evening he came to work. He pushed his cart. He cleaned the bathrooms and emptied the trash and mopped the endless floors. And then, when the last professor had gone home and the building belonged to him, Noah taught himself. He taught himself from garbage. That was the truth of it, and it was not a shameful truth. It was a magnificent one. The professors of MIT threw away more knowledge in a week than most people saw in a lifetime. They threw away rough drafts covered in equations. They threw away photocopied papers with a single typo. They threw away entire textbooks when a new edition came out, dropping them in the recycling bins like they were nothing. And Noah fished them out. He carried them home in his backpack. He stacked them beside his bed until his tiny room looked like a library that had been through a flood. And he read. God, how he read. He read until his eyes burned. He read equations he did not understand, and then he read them again and again until they cracked open and gave up their secrets. He filled notebooks. He filled the backs of discarded exams. He wrote on napkins and on his own hands. And slowly, over 3 years in the dark alone without a single teacher and without a single dollar of tuition, Noah Bennett taught himself mathematics at a level that most doctoral students never reached. And there was one more thing Noah did, the thing that would change everything. He listened. The lecture halls at MIT were old, and the doors were heavy, but the doors were not soundproof. And Noah discovered that if he was cleaning the hallway outside a room where a seminar was happening, and if he cleaned very slowly, very quietly, he could hear. He could hear the professors argue. He could hear the visiting scholars present their work. He could hear the arguments that never made it into the textbooks, the real conversations, the doubts and the disagreements and the wild ideas that were the beating heart of the whole thing. And it was standing outside one of those heavy doors with a mop in his hand that Noah Bennett first heard the words that would come to define his life, the Everett equation. He heard a young professor say it almost in a whisper, the way people say the name of a ghost, the Everett equation. A problem so hard that it had defeated the greatest mathematicians in the world for 15 years. A problem with a prize of $1 million attached to it, offered by a foundation that was so certain the money would never be paid out that they treated it like a marketing stunt. 47 doctors of philosophy had attempted the Everett equation. 47 had failed. And the man who had built the entire theoretical framework, the equation stood on the man whose name was attached to it, as surely as if he had invented it himself, was the most powerful professor in the department. Richard Caldwell. Noah heard that name spoken with a kind of fear. Caldwell decided who got scholarships. Caldwell decided who got research positions. Caldwell's signature on a letter could launch a career, and Caldwell's frown could end one. For 25 years, his name had meant genius and authority and success. His work was printed in the textbooks Noah fished out of the trash. His face was on the covers of journals. And his framework, his beautiful, elegant, celebrated framework, was the foundation on which the Everett equation rested. So Noah did what any obsessed 20-year-old would do. He decided to solve it. He did not tell anyone. Who would he tell? His father would have worried. There was no one else. So Noah simply took the Everett equation into himself the way he took in everything, and he began to work. For a year, he got nowhere. He tried every approach he could find in the discarded papers. He followed the tracks of the 47 who had failed, and he ran into the same walls they had run into. He filled 100 notebooks with dead ends. And there were nights when he sat on the floor of an empty lecture hall at 3 a.m, surrounded by his own scribbled failures, and he asked himself who he thought he was. A janitor? a boy with no degree, no teacher, no money, no right to even be in the building trying to solve a problem that had beaten men with every advantage in the world. But then in the second year, Noah noticed something. He noticed that all 47 failures had failed in the same place. It was strange. It was so strange that at first Noah thought he was imagining it. But he went back through every attempt he could find, every discarded draft, every published near miss, and the pattern held. Every mathematician who had attacked the Everett equation had gotten stuck at the exact same point. They all sailed along beautifully, and then they all hit the same invisible wall, and they all shattered against it in the same way, which meant the wall was not part of the problem. The wall was part of the assumption. Every one of them had started from the same place. They had all built their attack on the same foundation. And that foundation, that starting assumption that every single one of them treated as obviously, unquestionably true, was Richard Caldwell's framework. Noah stared at that realization for a long time, and then with his heart pounding, he did the thing that no one else had dared to do. He asked a simple, dangerous question. What if the foundation is wrong? It took Noah another full year to be sure. A year of testing it from every angle. A year of trying to prove himself wrong because he was terrified of being the arrogant fool who thought he knew better than the whole world. But every test came back the same. Caldwell's third assumption, the quiet little assumption buried so deep in the framework that everyone had stopped seeing it was flawed. Not obviously, not stupidly. It was a subtle, beautiful mistake, the kind only a genius could have made. But it was a mistake. And it was the reason 47 brilliant people had smashed themselves against the same wall for 15 years. The Everett equation was not impossible. It had just been built on a crack. And Noah Bennett, the janitor's son, who cleaned the toilets of the men who could not solve it, was the only person alive who could see the crack. He should have kept it to himself. He knew that. He knew that a boy in his position with no credentials and no protection could not simply walk up to the most powerful professor at MIT and tell him that his life's work was resting on a broken assumption. That was not how the world worked. That was how a poor boy got himself and his father crushed. So Noah kept it to himself for a while. But knowledge like that does not sit quietly. It burns. And one night, at 2 a.m, cleaning the largest lecture hall in the building, Noah looked at the empty blackboard, and he could not help himself. He picked up a piece of chalk, and he began to write. He wrote the Everett equation, and then below it he began to write the truth, the reframing, the path around the broken assumption that he had found and no one else had. He wrote fast the way you write when the thing has been trapped inside you for years, and it finally has somewhere to go. The chalk squeaked, the board filled, and Noah, for the first time in his life, let his whole mind out where the world could see it. He did not hear the door open. He did not hear the footsteps. He only heard the voice. "What?" said Professor Richard Caldwell. "Do you think you are doing?" Noah froze. The chalk stopped against the board. He turned slowly, and there he was. Caldwell. The most famous man in the department, standing in the doorway of a lecture hall at 2 a.m, staring at a janitor covered in chalk dust, staring at the blackboard behind him, staring at the equation. For a moment, Caldwell did not seem angry. He seemed confused the way a man is confused when he sees a thing that does not fit into his understanding of the world. A dog walking on its hind legs, a fish climbing a tree, a janitor writing advanced mathematics on his blackboard. And then Caldwell's eyes moved across the board, and Noah watched the professor's face change. Because Caldwell was not stupid. Caldwell was whatever else he was, one of the finest mathematical minds in the country, and it took him only seconds to understand what he was looking at. It was the Everett equation. And it was not a mess. It was not a child's imitation. It was a serious, structured, deliberate attack on the problem. And it was aimed with terrifying precision at the exact foundation Caldwell had spent his life building. "Where did you get this?" Caldwell said. His voice had gone very quiet. "Who gave you this?" "Nobody gave it to me," Noah said. "Don't lie to me." Caldwell stepped into the room. "This is not the work of a janitor. Someone gave you this. A student? A grad student put you up to this. What is this, a prank?" "It's not a prank, Professor." "Then explain it." Caldwell folded his arms. His voice had a cruel edge now, the edge of a powerful man who has recovered from his surprise and remembered exactly who he is. Go on. You're standing there covered in whatever you clean the bathrooms with, telling me you've written a legitimate attack on the Everett equation. Explain it to me. Do you even understand what you're writing?" And Noah, who had spent 3 years being invisible, who had spent 3 years keeping his head down and his eyes low, who had learned 1,000 times over that a poor boy's safest move is to disappear, looked Richard Caldwell in the eye and said the words that would blow his whole quiet life apart. "Yes, Professor," he said. "I think your third assumption is wrong." The silence that followed was total. Caldwell stared at him, and something happened in the professor's face, something that Noah would think about for a long time afterward. It was not anger, not at first. It was fear, just a flash of it, a flicker, gone almost before it appeared. Because for one instant, hearing his own deepest, most private mathematical doubt spoken out loud by a janitor at 2 a.m, Richard Caldwell was afraid. And then the fear was gone, and the anger rushed in to fill the space where it had been, and the anger was enormous. "You clean floors," Caldwell said. Each word was a stone. "You empty trash cans. You mop up the messes that better men leave behind. And you're standing in my department at 2 a.m, telling me that I am wrong." Noah lowered his eyes. It was the oldest reflex he had. "Keep your head down. Disappear." "I also study mathematics," he said quietly. "You study mathematics?" Caldwell laughed, and it was not a kind laugh. "You study mathematics? From where? What program? What advisor? What degree? Where did you study mathematics, boy?" Noah did not answer. Because the answer was the trash cans. The answer was the recycling bins, and the discarded textbooks, and the equations he heard through heavy doors. And he knew what that answer would sound like to a man like Caldwell. "That's what I thought," Caldwell said. He looked at the board again, at the beautiful, dangerous work covering it, and Noah watched him decide something, watched a cold plan assemble itself behind the professor's eyes. "You know what your name is? I'll find out your name, and I'll find out your father's name, because I'm certain your father works in this building too, doesn't he? People like you always come in packs." Noah's stomach turned to ice. "Please leave my father out of this." "Your father." Caldwell smiled now, a slow and terrible smile. "So he does work here. Good. That's good to know. He has nothing to do with this. He doesn't even know I'm here." "Oh, I believe that," Caldwell said. "I believe he has no idea his son spends his nights vandalizing my blackboards with fantasies about correcting my work. But he'll know soon. Everyone will know." Noah felt the whole thing slipping out of his control. He had made a terrible mistake. He had let the burning thing out, and now it was loose in the world, and it was going to burn down the only thing he had. He should have apologized. He should have grabbed his card and disappeared, and prayed that Caldwell forgot his face by morning. That was the smart move. That was the survival move. His father would have told him to make it. But there was another thing in Noah underneath the fear, something that 3 years of trash cans and heavy doors and lowered eyes had not managed to kill. And it rose up in him now, and it opened his mouth, and it made him say the second unforgivable thing. "I can prove it," Noah said. Caldwell's smile froze. "The third assumption." Noah went on, and now the fear was still there, but the certainty was stronger. "You define the boundary condition as fixed. Everyone does. It's in the framework. It's in the textbooks. It's the thing nobody questions, because you established it 20 years ago, and nobody has had a reason to look at it again. But it isn't fixed, Professor. Under the transformation, the equation requires it can't stay fixed. And every single person who's failed at the Everett equation failed because they treated it as fixed, because you told them to, because it's your framework, and nobody argues with your framework. That's the wall. That's the wall all 47 of them hit. It isn't the equation, it's the assumption, and I can prove it. The words landed in the empty lecture hall like stones into a still pond. And Richard Caldwell, the most powerful man in the mathematics department, the man whose framework had stood untouched for 2 decades, stood very still and said nothing at all for a long, long moment. And in that moment, Noah saw it again, the fear, longer this time, because a part of Caldwell, a part he had buried so deep that he barely knew it was there, had wondered the same thing, had known in the small hours of his own sleepless nights that the third assumption was not as solid as he pretended. He had felt the crack. He had chosen not to look at it. For 20 years he had chosen not to look at it because his entire reputation, his entire towering career was built on top of it. And now a boy in a janitor's uniform had looked at it in 3 years alone in the dark and had seen exactly what Caldwell had spent 20 years refusing to see. That was the moment Caldwell decided to destroy him. "You're going to regret those words," Caldwell said softly. "You have no idea what you've just done." "I'm sorry," Noah said, and he meant it, but it was too late and they both knew it. "I didn't mean any disrespect. I've spent years on this and I know I'm right and I couldn't." "Go home," Caldwell said. Noah blinked. "Professor? Go home. Take your cart, take your mop, take your little fantasies and go home. And come to my office at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. Bring your father." Caldwell turned toward the door, and then he stopped and he looked back over his shoulder, and there was something almost gentle in his voice, which was the most frightening thing of all. "You wanted to be seen, boy. You wanted someone to notice the genius mopping the floors. Well, congratulations. I've noticed you. And by this time tomorrow, so will everyone else." And then he was gone. Noah stood alone in the enormous empty lecture hall, chalk dust on his hands, the Everett equation glowing on the board behind him, and he understood with a sick and dropping certainty that he had just gambled everything, and that he might have already lost. He did not sleep that night. How could he? He sat on the edge of his narrow bed surrounded by the towers of salvaged textbooks that had been his only teachers, and he ran it over and over in his mind. He could have stayed invisible. He could have kept his head down. He could have protected his father, protected the fragile little life the two of them had built out of grief and debt and stubbornness. And instead, because he could not keep one burning truth inside his chest, he had walked straight into the path of the most dangerous man he knew. When the gray light of morning finally came, Noah heard his father in the kitchen. The clink of the coffee cup, the scrape of the chair, the small ordinary sounds of a man getting ready to go and clean the building where he had cleaned for 19 years. And Noah's heart broke because he was about to hand his father a bill for a debt his father did not even know had been run up. He came out of his room. Marcus looked up from his coffee, and his face changed immediately the way a father's face changes when he sees that something is wrong with his child. "Noah," Marcus said, "what is it? What happened?" So Noah told him, all of it. The Everett equation, the 3 years of secret work, the trash cans and the heavy doors, the night in the lecture hall, Caldwell, the third assumption, the words he could not take back, and the appointment at 9 o'clock in the professor's office. Marcus listened to all of it without saying a word, and when Noah was finished, the old man sat very still, holding his coffee cup in 2 hands, and he was quiet for so long that Noah began to feel afraid in a whole new way. "Say something," Noah whispered. "Please, say you're angry. Yell at me. I deserve it. I ruined everything. I'm so sorry, Dad. I'm so sorry." Marcus set down the coffee cup. And when he looked up, there were tears standing in his eyes, but they were not the tears Noah expected. 3 years, Marcus said, and his voice cracked. 3 years you've been doing this, in the dark, alone, cleaning floors and then teaching yourself mathematics that grown men with fancy degrees can't do. He shook his head slowly. "And you told me it was just a hobby. You told me you didn't care about college. You looked me in the eye and you lied to me so that I wouldn't feel bad about what we couldn't give you. Dad, do you have any idea," Marcus said, and now the tears spilled over, "how proud your mother would be of you right now?" Noah could not speak. "Your mother knew," Marcus went on. "She knew when you were 7 years old. She said this child is going to do something in this world. And I believed her, and then she got sick and everything fell apart, and I stopped believing it because I couldn't stand to believe it, because believing it hurt too much when I couldn't do anything about it." He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "But you never stopped. You never stopped, son. You just went and did it anyway, in the dark, out of the garbage." "But I've ruined it," Noah said. "Caldwell is going to fire you. He said to bring you tomorrow. He's going to make an example of us. Your job, Dad, 19 years, and I threw it away because I couldn't keep my mouth shut." "Noah?" Marcus reached across the table and took his son's hand, and his grip was strong. The grip of a man who had spent 20 years fixing things with those hands. Listen to me. Listen. A job is a job. I can get another job. I've been getting jobs my whole life. But a mind like yours. He shook his head. The world only makes a mind like yours once in a great while, and I will be damned if I let a man like Richard Caldwell make you ashamed of it. You don't understand how much power he has. I understand exactly how much power he has, Marcus said. I've been cleaning up after men like him for 20 years. I know what they are. I know how they think. They think the whole world belongs to them because they were born standing on higher ground, and most of the time they're right, because most of the time nobody ever tells them no. He leaned forward. But every once in a while, son, every once in a great while, somebody who came up from the bottom looks a man like that dead in the eye and says, no, not this time, not to me. Noah stared at his father, and something began to shift inside him. The fear was still there, but underneath the fear that other thing was rising again, the thing that had opened his mouth in the lecture hall, the thing his mother had seen when he was 7 years old. You really think I should go? Noah asked. I think, Marcus said, that you spent 3 years finding the truth, and now a powerful man is going to stand in front of you and dare you to say it out loud in the daylight where it counts, and I think the only thing worse than saying it and losing, he squeezed his son's hand, is not saying it at all, and spending the rest of your life cleaning his floors, knowing you were right and being too afraid to prove it. At 9 o'clock that morning, Noah Bennett and his father walked into Richard Caldwell's office. But the office was not empty, because Caldwell had not spent the night stewing. Caldwell had spent the night planning, and what he had planned was not a quiet conversation. There were other professors in the room, a dozen of them, senior members of the department. The men and women who ran everything gathered together at 9 in the morning because Richard Caldwell had told them there was something they needed to see. And in the center of the room, on a large display screen, glowed the Everett equation. Ah, said Caldwell when Noah walked in. Here he is, the one I told you about. He turned to the assembled faculty, and his voice was warm and pleasant and absolutely poisonous. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce our newest expert. This young man cleans the floors of this building at night. And last night I caught him at my blackboard informing me that my framework, the framework in your textbooks, the framework this entire department is built on, is wrong. A ripple of laughter went through the room. Noah felt his face burn. Beside him, he felt his father go very still. Now, Caldwell continued, I could have simply had him removed, but that seemed unfair. A young man makes such a bold claim he deserves a chance to defend it. Don't you think, a fair chance? In front of witnesses. He gestured at the glowing equation on the screen. So here is your chance, son. Here is the Everett equation. The problem that has defeated 47 doctors of philosophy over 15 years. The problem with $1 million prize that no one has been able to claim. You told me last night that you can solve it, that you can succeed where every trained mathematician in the world has failed. He spread his hands. So, solve it. The room went quiet. Every eye turned to Noah. He stood there 20 years old in a jacket his father had pressed for him that morning, and he understood that this was a trap. Caldwell did not expect him to solve it. Caldwell expected him to stammer and sweat and shrink and flee and provide the entire senior faculty with a story they would laugh about for years. The janitor who thought he was a genius. It was a public execution dressed up as an opportunity. And if I do, Noah heard himself ask, if I show you what I found, what happens then? Caldwell smiled. Then I will personally apologize to you in front of every person in this room. And if I can't do it today, Noah said, if I need more time, this isn't a problem you solve in 10 minutes at a whiteboard, and you know that better than anyone. Something flashed in Caldwell's eyes. He had not expected the boy to negotiate. He had expected him to break. Time, Caldwell said. You want time, of course you do. Very well. There is a conference in 6 weeks, the Everett Conference, the largest gathering of mathematicians in the country. I sit on its committee. I will secure you a place on the stage. He leaned forward and his voice dropped, and every warm and pleasant note drained out of it. You'll present your solution there. in front of thousands, in front of the entire field, and you will either prove that a janitor's son solved the greatest problem in mathematics. He paused. Or you will fail publicly completely in front of the whole world. And when you fail. Caldwell straightened up, and he looked not at Noah but at Marcus. He looked at the father, and he delivered the sentence that he had been building toward all along, the sentence designed to close the trap forever, the sentence that revealed exactly the kind of man he was. When you fail, Caldwell said, your father cleans out his locker, 19 years of service gone, because I will not have this department made a laughingstock by a family that doesn't know its place. That is the wager, son, your fantasy, against your father's livelihood. You want your chance, that's the price of it. The room was silent. Some of the professors shifted uncomfortably. Even they could feel that a line had been crossed, that something ugly had entered the room. But no one said anything. No one ever said anything. That was how men like Caldwell kept their power. Noah turned and looked at his father. Marcus was standing perfectly straight. His jaw was tight. His eyes were fixed on Caldwell with an expression Noah had never seen on his father's face before. Not anger exactly, but something older and harder than anger. And then Marcus turned his head and he looked at his son, and the hard expression softened, and in that look Noah saw everything. He saw his mother at the kitchen table. He saw 3 years of trash cans. He saw 19 years of a proud man cleaning up after people who never learned his name. He saw the whole weight of it, and he saw underneath all of it a single word. Marcus nodded, just once, barely a movement at all. But Noah understood it. It meant, I'm not afraid. It meant, do not shrink for my sake. It meant, say the truth, son, out loud in the daylight where it counts, and let the chips fall where they will. It meant everything Marcus had said at the kitchen table that morning. It meant this is the moment, this is the once in a great while. Look him dead in the eye and say no. And so Noah Bennett turned back to Richard Caldwell. And the fear was still there, it would always be there, but it no longer had the loudest voice in the room. He thought about the third assumption buried so deep that everyone had stopped seeing it. He thought about 47 brilliant minds shattering against the same wall for 15 years, all because one powerful man had built his framework on a crack and refused to look down. He thought about his mother, saying this child is going to do something in this world. And he thought about the sentence he would have to live with if he walked out of that room and said nothing. Because they already laugh at me, he thought, and they will laugh at me whether I speak or not. But someday someone like me is going to walk into a room like this with a mind that nobody thinks a person like them could have, and they are going to need to know that they belong here too. You're staking my father's job on this, Noah said. His voice did not shake. In front of all these witnesses, 6 weeks, the Everett Conference. I present, and if I'm wrong, he loses everything he's given this place for 19 years. That is the wager, Caldwell said. And if I'm right, Noah said, you apologize, in front of the whole field, for everything. Caldwell laughed. He was so certain. That was the thing Noah would remember most in the weeks to come. The man was so completely, so absolutely certain that a janitor's son could not possibly be right that he did not even hesitate. If you're right, Caldwell said, I'll apologize on my knees. The room held its breath. And Noah Bennett looked at the most powerful man in the mathematics department, the man who had just wagered his father's dignity on a public humiliation, the man who had built a wall so high that he thought no one from the bottom could ever climb it. And Noah gave him the only answer his mother's son could give. I accept. By the time Noah and his father walked out of Caldwell's office, the story was already moving faster than either of them could stop it. They had not made it down a single hallway before the first phone came up. A graduate student leaning against the wall saw the janitor's son who had just been marched into a faculty meeting and lifted his phone and started recording. Noah felt it before he saw it, that particular prickle on the back of the neck that a person only learns after years of being watched and judged. He kept his eyes forward. He kept walking. Is that him? The student whispered to another. Is that the janitor kid? Caldwell's going to eat him alive, the second one said, not bothering to lower his voice. Poor guy has no idea. Marcus put a hand on his son's shoulder and steered him toward the exit, and he did not slow down, and he did not look at the students, and he did not stop until they were outside in the cold morning air where they could breathe. "They're already talking," Noah said. "It's not even 10 in the morning and they're already—" "Let them talk," Marcus said. "You don't understand, Dad. By tonight it'll be everywhere. By tomorrow the whole campus, the whole field. Caldwell made sure of that. That's the whole point. He wants the biggest possible crowd for when I fall on my face." Marcus stopped walking. He turned his son to face him right there on the sidewalk, and he looked at him with those steady eyes that had gotten the family through the worst years of their lives. "Then don't fall on your face," Marcus said. And that was the whole conversation, because Marcus Bennett was not a man who wasted words, and he had already said everything that mattered at the kitchen table that morning. He squeezed Noah's shoulder once, and then he pulled on his gloves and went back inside to do his shift, because a man who might lose his job in 6 weeks still had a job to do today. And Noah watched his father walk back into the building where his fate was now hanging by a thread, and he understood that he had exactly 6 weeks to become the person his father already believed he was. By that evening, the video was online. It was 30 seconds long. Noah walking out of the faculty office, head down, jaw tight. The caption said everything the whole campus was thinking. Janitor challenged to solve the Everett equation. LOL. It had 4,000 views by midnight. By the next morning, it had 40,000. Noah did not watch it. He could not afford to watch it. But he heard about it because everyone in the building had seen it, and the night crew talked about nothing else. "That's you, right?" one of the other custodians asked him, a heavy-set man named Gus, who had worked the night shift for a decade. "That's you in the video. You're the one who talked back to Caldwell." "I didn't talk back to him," Noah said. "I told him something true." Gus laughed, but not cruelly. Kid, listen to me. I've been here 10 years. I've watched that man ruin people. Real people professors with actual degrees. People who crossed him just a little bit. He does not lose. You hear me? He does not lose. And you're a janitor. No offense." "None taken." "So, do yourself a favor," Gus said, lowering his voice. "Go in there tomorrow and apologize. Tell him you were wrong. Tell him you were tired, you had a rough night, whatever. Save your dad's job, because that man is going to use every ounce of power he's got to make sure you go down, and there is nothing you can do about it." Noah looked at him. "What if I'm right, Gus?" "It doesn't matter if you're right," Gus said, and there was real frustration in his voice. The frustration of a man who had watched the world work exactly one way for his entire life. Being right doesn't mean anything for people like us. Being right and being poor just means you were right on your way to getting crushed. You think the truth is going to protect you? The truth doesn't protect anybody who can't afford a lawyer. Wake up. And the terrible thing was that Noah understood exactly what Gus meant. He had believed the same thing for most of his life. He had built his whole quiet existence around it. Keep your head down. Being right doesn't matter. Disappear. But something had changed the night he picked up that chalk, and there was no going back to the old belief now, even if he wanted to. "I can't apologize for something that's true," Noah said quietly, "even if it costs me everything. Because if I do that, then he's right about me. Then he's right about all of us." Gus stared at him for a long moment, and then he shook his head, and there was something almost like grief in his eyes. The grief of a man watching a young person walk toward a cliff he cannot pull them back from. "You're going to get your father fired," Gus said. "I hope you know that. I hope you can live with that." And he walked away. Noah stood alone in the hallway with his cart, and Gus's words sat in his stomach like a stone because they were the exact words his own fear had been whispering to him since the moment he said, "I accept." "You're going to get your father fired. I hope you can live with that." He did not sleep that night either. The next 6 weeks became a war. Noah worked his full shift every single night because he could not afford to lose the job, and because if he stopped cleaning the floors, then he would be admitting he was ashamed of the work, and he was not ashamed of the work. And then when his shift ended at midnight, instead of going home, he stayed. He took over an empty lecture hall, and he filled the blackboards, and he worked on the proof until the sun came up. He slept 4 hours, sometimes 3, sometimes not at all. And the proof fought him. That was the thing nobody understood, the thing that made the fear so much worse. Noah knew he was right. He knew in his bones that Caldwell's third assumption was flawed. He could feel the crack in the foundation, the way you can feel a loose tooth with your tongue. But knowing something is true and proving it are two completely different things, and Noah was learning that difference the hard way, night after night alone. Because it was not enough to say the assumption was wrong. He had to show it. He had to build a complete, airtight, undeniable path from the broken foundation all the way to the far side of the Everett equation, a path so solid that the greatest mathematicians in the world could attack it from every angle and fail to knock it down. And every time Noah thought he had it, he found a gap, a place where his logic thinned out, a step that felt true, but that he could not yet prove. 3 weeks in at 4 a.m, Noah found a gap that he could not close. He stared at it for an hour. He tried everything. And slowly, a cold and horrible thought crept into his mind, a thought he had been holding at bay for weeks. What if the gap could not be closed? What if he had been right about the crack in the foundation, but wrong about the path around it? What if he had staked his father's livelihood on a beautiful idea that fell apart at the last step? Noah put down the chalk, and for the first time since his mother died, he cried. He sat on the floor of the empty lecture hall at 4 a.m, surrounded by his own handwriting, 20 years old and terrified, and he cried like the child he had never really been allowed to be. Because Gus was right, because his fear was right, because he had reached too high, and now he could see the ground rushing up. And that was the moment his father found him. Marcus had come looking for him. It was nearly 5 a.m, and Noah had not come home, and Marcus, who had learned in the worst years to always check when his boy went quiet, had walked the whole building until he found the light on in the lecture hall. He came in and saw his son on the floor, and his heart broke, and he did not say a single word about it. He simply sat down on the floor next to him, an old man in a maintenance uniform, and he waited. "I can't do it," Noah finally said. "There's a gap. I've been on it for 3 weeks and I can't close it. I was so sure, Dad, I was so sure. And now I'm sitting here at 5 a.m. and I can't finish the proof, and I've bet your whole life on it." Marcus was quiet for a while. Then he said, "Show me." Noah laughed a broken little sound. "Dad, it's the Everett equation. You fix boilers." "I know what I do," Marcus said without any anger. "And I know I can't read a word of what's on those boards. But I've been fixing broken things for 40 years, son. Boilers and pipes and radiators and every kind of machine there is. And I'll tell you something about broken things that maybe those professors never learned." He nodded at the boards. "When you're stuck on a thing, when you've tried everything and it still won't work 99 times out of 100, it's because you're assuming something's true that isn't. You keep working on the part that's broken. But the part that's broken isn't where the problem is. The problem is somewhere you already decided was fine. Somewhere you stopped looking a long time ago." Kin sama miski. Noah went very still. "That's the whole trick of my job," Marcus went on, not noticing what he had done. "Everybody looks at the thing that's obviously broken, but a good repairman looks at the thing everybody already trusts, because that's where the real problem always hides, in the part nobody's checking anymore." Noah stared at his father, and then he stared at the gap in his proof, the gap he had been attacking for 3 weeks. He had been assaulting it directly, hammering at the broken step, trying to force it closed. But what if the step wasn't the problem? What if the problem was somewhere earlier, somewhere he had already decided was fine, somewhere he had stopped looking? He stood up so fast, his head spun. "Say that again," Noah whispered. "The part nobody's checking anymore." "The part nobody's checking anymore," Marcus repeated, confused. Noah grabbed the chalk, and he did not go to the gap. He went 4 steps back to a transformation he had written down weeks ago and never questioned a step so basic and so standard that he had never once thought to examine it. And he examined it now. And there, hiding in plain sight in the part he had trusted and stopped looking at, was the answer. The reason the gap would not close was that the gap was not really the problem. The problem was an assumption he had inherited without thinking. 4 steps earlier, the same kind of unquestioned inheritance that had trapped all 47 of the mathematicians before him. Noah's hand flew across the board, and the gap closed. Not with a struggle, with an inevitability the way a key turns in the right lock. The whole proof snapped into place around the correction, and Noah stood back breathing hard and looked at what he had built, and he knew that it was complete. He turned around. His father was watching him with a small, tired smile. "Did I help?" Marcus asked. Noah could not speak for a moment. Then he crossed the room and hugged his father hard, the way he had not hugged him since the funeral. "You just solved the Everett equation, Dad," he said into the old man's shoulder. "A boiler repairman just solved the Everett equation." "I didn't solve anything," Marcus said, patting his son's back. "I just told you where broken things hide." But that was exactly what solving it had required. And Noah would never forget, for the rest of his life, that the final piece of the greatest mathematical proof of his generation had come not from a professor, not from a textbook, not from a heavy door in the dark, but from his father, a man who had never gone to college, who fixed broken machines for a living, and who understood the one thing all the geniuses had forgotten, that the truth always hides in the place you stopped checking. But while Noah was closing the gap in his proof, Richard Caldwell was building a trap of his own, because Caldwell had not spent those weeks idle. From the moment the boy said, "I accept," Caldwell had understood that he had a problem. Not a mathematical problem, a political one. He had staked his reputation publicly in front of the senior faculty on the humiliation of a janitor. If the janitor simply failed, Caldwell won, and it cost him nothing. But there was a small, cold worry that had lodged in Caldwell's mind the moment he saw that blackboard at 2 a.m, and it would not go away. The worry was that the boy might be right. So Caldwell did what powerful men do when they are worried. He went looking for a way to destroy the boy that did not depend on the mathematics at all. He started with the obvious. He assumed the boy had cheated. He assumed someone was feeding him the work, some disgruntled grad student, some rival trying to embarrass Caldwell from the shadows. So Caldwell used his considerable power to investigate. He pulled the boy's employment file. He learned his name, Noah Bennett. He learned his father's name, Marcus Bennett, 19 years on the maintenance staff. He learned the family had no money, that the mother had died of a long illness, that there was medical debt. He learned there was no college, no program, no advisor, no possible legitimate source for what he had seen on that board. And that was the problem, because a boy with no training should not have been able to produce that work, which meant either the boy had cheated or the boy was something Caldwell did not want to believe existed. So Caldwell dug deeper. He wanted proof of cheating. He wanted a stolen paper, a secret mentor, anything he could hold up at the conference to expose the boy as a fraud before he ever opened his mouth. He had a graduate assistant go through the building's records. He had someone quietly look into whether any faculty member had been meeting with the janitor after hours. He wanted a smoking gun. He found nothing. What he found instead disturbed him far more than any evidence of cheating would have, because his assistant digging through the maintenance areas where Noah worked found the boy's stash. Years of it. Notebooks. Hundreds of them filled cover to cover with tiny, dense handwriting. Salvaged textbooks, their spines cracked from being read 1,000 times, their margins black with notes. Discarded exams covered in original work. Thousands upon thousands of pages, all of it self-taught, all of it authentic, all of it the record of a mind that had built itself out of garbage in the dark for 3 years. Caldwell sat in his office with a stack of those notebooks in front of him late one night, and he read them. And the further he read, the colder he became. Because there was no cheating here. There was no mentor. There was no stolen paper. There was only a boy alone teaching himself mathematics at a level that Caldwell's own doctoral students could not reach. The work was raw, in places unpolished, self-invented, but it was real. It was more than real. In places, it was brilliant. In places, it went where Caldwell himself had never thought to go. And near the end of the most recent notebook, Caldwell found it. His third assumption, and beside it in the boy's cramped handwriting, a single line that made the great professor's blood run cold. This is where they all fail, not the equation, the foundation. Caldwell built it wrong and no one will look because it's his. Caldwell closed the notebook. His hands were not quite steady, because the boy was right. He had known it somewhere for years. That was the secret Caldwell had buried so deep, he had almost convinced himself it was not there. 20 years ago, when he built the framework that made his name, he had made a choice. He had defined a boundary condition as fixed, because fixing it made the whole theory clean and elegant and publishable, and because at the time no one, including Caldwell, had any reason to think it mattered, and the framework had made his career. It had gone into the textbooks. It had become the foundation the whole field stood on. But somewhere in the years that followed, quietly alone in the small hours when a man cannot lie to himself, Caldwell had begun to suspect that the choice had been wrong. He had felt it the way Noah had felt it, like a loose tooth. And he had done the thing that Noah's father had described. He had stopped checking. Because the assumption was his and his whole reputation stood on top of it, and to check it, to really check it, was to risk discovering that everything he had built for 25 years was resting on a crack. 47 mathematicians had failed at the Everett equation, and Richard Caldwell had watched them fail one after another, and he had said nothing, because every single one of them had failed at the exact spot where his own flawed assumption lived. He had known. In some deep and shameful part of himself, he had known why they were failing. And he had let them fail year after year, rather than admit that the wall they were breaking themselves against had his name on it. This was the twist that not even Caldwell had fully admitted to himself until that night, reading a janitor's notebooks by lamplight. He was not defending a theory he believed in. He was defending a theory he suspected was wrong. And he was about to publicly destroy a 20-year-old boy and get his father fired not to protect the truth, but to bury it. Caldwell should have stopped there. A better man would have stopped there. He would have called the boy into his office and admitted it, and found a way to bring the discovery into the light with honor. But Richard Caldwell had spent 25 years being the smartest man in every room, and a man does not give that up easily. The higher a man climbs on a lie, the more it costs him to climb back down. And Caldwell had climbed very, very high. So instead of stopping, Caldwell made a decision that would define him. He decided that if he could not prove the boy was a cheater, he would make sure the boy never got to speak at all. He picked up the phone, and he began quietly to work. Noah felt the pressure change about a week before the conference. First, his hours were cut. His supervisor, avoiding his eyes, told him the department was restructuring the night crew, and that Noah's shifts were being reduced. It meant less money. It also, more importantly, meant less access to the building at night, less time in the empty lecture halls where he did his work. Noah understood immediately that it was no coincidence. Then came the letter, an official letter on department stationery informing Noah that his access to campus facilities outside of scheduled work hours was being revoked effective immediately for security reasons, which meant he could no longer stay after his shift, which meant the blackboards were gone, which meant the one place he had to practice his presentation, to refine his proof, to prepare for the most important 2 hours of his life, had been taken from him with the stroke of a pen. "He's cutting off my legs," Noah told his father that night, holding the letter. "Before the race even starts. He knows I can't afford anywhere else to work. He knows the only place I have is the building, so he's locking me out of the building." Marcus read the letter slowly. His jaw tightened. "This is legal. It's his building, Dad. Everything is legal when you have that much power. That's what Gus keeps telling me. Being right doesn't matter. He doesn't have to beat my proof. He just has to make sure I never get to give it." And then the worst blow came 3 days before the conference. Noah received a second letter. This one informed him that his invitation to present at the Everett conference was under review by the conference committee, that questions had been raised about the academic legitimacy of an unaffiliated presenter, and that his slot might be withdrawn. Caldwell sat on that committee. Caldwell had promised him the stage in front of a dozen witnesses, and now Caldwell was using the same committee to take the stage away. Noah sat down hard when he read it, because he finally understood the full shape of the trap. Caldwell had never intended to give him a fair fight. The wager in the office, the 6 weeks, the stage in front of thousands, all of it, had been theater. Caldwell had needed to look fair in front of the senior faculty, but he had never once intended to let a janitor's son stand up in front of the entire field and prove him wrong. The plan had always been to grant the opportunity with one hand and strangle it with the other. "He's going to cancel my slot," Noah said. "He's going to make it look like a committee decision. And then he gets to tell everyone I chickened out, that I made a big claim and then ran away when it was time to prove it. He wins either way, Dad. If I fail, he wins. And if I'm not even allowed to try, he still wins. And he still fires you because the wager said if I fail. And not showing up counts as failing." Marcus said nothing for a long moment. Then he stood up and he pulled on his coat. "Where are you going?" Noah asked. "To see somebody," Marcus said. "Dad, it's 9 o'clock at night." "I know what time it is." Marcus paused at the door, and when he turned back, there was something in his face that Noah had almost never seen. A hardness. The look of a proud man who has been pushed exactly as far as he is willing to be pushed. "You want to know something, son? For 19 years I've kept my head down in that building. I've fixed their pipes and cleaned their messes, and I've never once asked anybody for anything. Not a favor, not a raise, not a single thing. I figured a man like me doesn't get to ask." He put on his hat. "Well, 19 years is a long time to never ask for anything. Maybe it's time I called in the only favor I've got." And before Noah could ask him what he meant, Marcus Bennett walked out into the night. He was gone for 3 hours. When he came back, he did not explain where he had been. But the next morning, everything changed. Noah received a third letter. This one was not from Caldwell, and it was not from the conference committee. It was from the office of the university's provost, the second most powerful person in the entire institution, a woman named Dr. Evelyn Hart. And the letter was short. It said that the matter of Noah Bennett's presentation had been brought to the provost's personal attention. It said that the university took very seriously the principle that ideas should be judged on their merit, not on the credentials of the person presenting them. And it said that Noah Bennett's slot at the Everett conference was confirmed personally by the provost's office, and that no committee action would be permitted to withdraw it. Noah read it 3 times. Then he looked up at his father, who was drinking his coffee at the kitchen table as if nothing had happened. "Dad," Noah said slowly, "how do you know the provost of MIT?" Marcus took a sip of his coffee. "I don't know her," he said, "but 11 years ago her daughter was a freshman here. Homesick. Miserable. Used to cry in the stairwell late at night when she thought nobody could see her. And there was this old maintenance man who worked the night shift who'd stop and talk to her sometimes. Bring her a coffee from the machine. Tell her it gets better. Tell her she belonged here." He shrugged. "Girl graduated top of her class, went on to do great things. And her mother, the provost, she came and found me once years ago, and she said, 'Mr. Bennett, if you ever need anything at all, you come to me.' And I said, 'Thank you, ma'am, but I don't expect I ever will.'" He looked at his son. "I never did ask her for anything in 11 years, because I figured a man like me shouldn't. But last night, I stood outside her house like a fool, and I knocked on her door, and I said, 'Ma'am, I never asked you for that favor. I'm asking now. Not for me, for my boy.'" Noah stared at his father, and he understood finally the full depth of what the man had done for him. For 19 years, Marcus had made himself small so that his family could survive. He had kept his head down. He had never asked. He had built his entire dignity around the idea that a man like him did not get to make demands of the powerful. And last night for his son, he had set all of that down. He had walked up to the door of one of the most powerful people at the university and asked for the one thing he had promised himself he would never ask for. "I don't know what to say," Noah whispered. "Don't say anything," Marcus said. "Just be ready, because I bought you the stage, son. But I can't stand on it for you. That part's yours." Caldwell learned that the provost had intervened, and for the first time in the entire affair, he lost his composure. He found out an hour before he was scheduled to teach a graduate seminar, and he canceled the seminar, and he sat in his office with the door locked, and he seethed. Because the provost's intervention meant that the boy could not be quietly disappeared. The stage was locked in. The presentation was going to happen in front of thousands, in front of the entire field. And now there was nowhere left for Caldwell to hide. He called his closest ally on the faculty, a professor named Dolan, who had built his own career in Caldwell's shadow, and who could be relied upon to defend the framework as fiercely as Caldwell himself. "He's going to present," Caldwell said. "The provost locked it in. There's nothing I can do about the slot." "So what?" Dolan said. "Let him present. He's a janitor, Richard. He'll get up there, he'll freeze, he'll embarrass himself, and it's over. This actually works in your favor. A bigger crowd for a bigger humiliation." But Caldwell was silent. And Dolan, who had known him for 20 years, heard the silence and understood it. "Richard," Dolan said slowly, "why are you so worried about a janitor?" And Caldwell almost told him. He almost said it out loud, the thing he had been carrying for 20 years, the thing he had finally admitted to himself, reading the boys' notebooks by lamplight. He almost said, "Because the janitor is right, Dolan. Because I built the framework on a crack, and I've known it for years, and I let 47 people break themselves against it, rather than admit it. And now a boy with no degree has seen exactly what I've spent 2 decades refusing to see. And if he gets to speak, if he gets 2 hours in front of the entire field, he is going to prove it, and everything I am is going to come apart." But he did not say it. Because Richard Caldwell had spent 25 years being the smartest man in every room, and he did not know how to be anything else. "I'm not worried," Caldwell said instead. "I just don't like loose ends. Here's what we're going to do. The boy gets his stage. Fine. But you and I are going to be in that audience. And the moment he opens his mouth, the moment he makes his first claim, we are going to challenge him. Publicly, relentlessly. We are not going to let him build his argument. We are going to interrupt and question and attack and rattle him until he falls apart in front of everyone. He's a child, Dolan. He's never presented anything to anyone. He's never faced a hostile room. He's spent his whole life keeping his head down and staying invisible. So we are going to do the one thing he has no defense against. We are going to make him visible, and then we are going to tear him to pieces in the light." And that Caldwell believed was a plan that could not fail, because it did not depend on the mathematics. It depended on fear. And Caldwell had spent his entire career learning exactly how to make a person afraid. What Caldwell did not know, what he could not know, was that fear was the one thing Noah Bennett had already conquered. Because in the days before the conference, with his access to the building revoked and nowhere to practice, Noah had done something. Unable to use the university's blackboards, he had gone to the one place he could still work. He had gone home to his tiny room stacked with salvaged textbooks, and he had taught himself to give the presentation with no board at all, no chalk, no notes. Nothing. He had memorized the entire 2-hour proof, every step, every transformation, every response to every objection he could imagine. He had rehearsed it walking the streets at night, muttering to himself like a madman. He had rehearsed it mopping floors. He had rehearsed it in his sleep. And more than that, Noah had spent 3 years listening through heavy doors to professors attack each other's work. He knew every trick. He knew how the powerful tried to rattle the powerless. He knew the interruptions, the manufactured doubts, the tone of voice designed to make a young presenter lose their nerve. He had heard it all 100 times from the outside. And he had learned something that the professors comfortable in their authority had never had to learn. He had learned how to hold on to the truth while the whole world was telling him he did not belong. The night before the conference, Noah could not sleep, and this time it was not from fear. He sat on the floor of his room, surrounded by the towers of books that had raised him, and he thought about his mother. This child is going to do something in this world. He thought about his father standing on a provost's doorstep, setting down 19 years of pride for his son. He thought about Gus telling him that being right didn't matter for people like them. And he thought about the crack in the foundation, the crack that Caldwell had built his kingdom on, and refused to look at the crack that had swallowed 47 brilliant minds. And Noah understood finally that tomorrow was not really about the Everett equation at all. Tomorrow was about whether a person's worth could be measured by the size of their bank account. Tomorrow was about whether truth belonged only to people who could afford the tuition. Tomorrow was about every kid who had ever been told in 1,000 quiet ways that they did not belong in the room. And Noah Bennett was going to walk into the most important gathering of mathematicians in the country, carrying nothing but a piece of chalk and 3 years of work done in the dark, and he was going to give them all an answer. His father knocked softly on the door and looked in. "You should sleep," Marcus said. "I know," Noah said. "I can't." Marcus came in and sat down on the floor next to him, the way he had that night in the lecture hall. For a while, neither of them spoke. "You scared?" Marcus finally asked. Noah thought about it honestly. "No," he said. "I was scared for 6 weeks. I was scared the whole time, but somewhere along the way it burned off. I think I used it all up." He looked at his father. "Now I'm just ready. "I've been ready my whole life, Dad. I just never had a room to be ready in." Marcus nodded slowly, and then he reached into his coat pocket and he took out something small and he pressed it into his son's hand. It was a piece of chalk, a single ordinary piece of white chalk. "From the supply closet," Marcus said. "The good kind, the kind the professors use. I've been handing this chalk to those men for 19 years. He closed his son's fingers around it. "Tomorrow you use it to write something none of them could." Noah looked down at the chalk in his hand, and his eyes stung. "Get some sleep if you can," Marcus said, standing up with a groan an old man's knees. He paused at the door. "And Noah, whatever happens tomorrow, whatever that man does to us, I want you to know something." His voice caught. "You already did the thing your mother said you'd do. You already did something in this world. You did it in that little room out of those books with nobody watching and nobody helping and nobody believing but you. The stage tomorrow, that's just so the rest of them can see it too." He nodded once. "But I already saw it. I've been seeing it for 3 years. And then he turned off the light and left his son alone with a piece of chalk and the weight of everything that morning would bring. Across the city, in a large house he had bought with the money his flawed framework had made him, Richard Caldwell also lay awake. But he was not at peace. He was rehearsing his attacks. He was planning his interruptions. He was preparing to do to a 20-year-old boy the same thing he had done to the truth for 20 years, to shout it down, to bury it, to protect his kingdom at any cost. And he told himself over and over that he was defending mathematics, that he was protecting the field from an unqualified fraud, that the boy deserved what was coming. But deep down in the part of himself he had stopped checking. A long time ago, Richard Caldwell knew exactly what he was. He was a man who had built his life on a crack. And in a few hours, a janitor's son was going to walk onto a stage and show the whole world where it ran. The morning of the Everett conference, Noah Bennett put on the only suit he owned, a second-hand jacket that his mother had bought him for her own funeral, and he walked into the largest auditorium at MIT, carrying nothing but a single piece of chalk in his pocket. The room was already full. 2,000 seats and every one of them taken. Mathematicians had flown in from across the country and around the world. Department chairs, prize winners, famous names, the entire aristocracy of a field that prided itself on being the purest expression of human intelligence. And beyond the room, tens of thousands more were watching the live stream online because the story had spread far past MIT now. The janitor and the equation. Everyone wanted to see how it ended. Noah walked down the center aisle toward the stage, and he felt the eyes on him, thousands of eyes, and he heard the whispers move through the crowd like wind through grass. There he is. That's him. That's the janitor. And for one terrible moment, the old reflex rose up in him, the instinct that 3 years of trash cans had drilled into his bones. Keep your head down, disappear, you don't belong here. And then he saw his father. Marcus Bennett was sitting in the front row. He had traded his maintenance uniform for a suit of his own, an old one pressed within an inch of its life. And he was sitting very straight with his hands folded in his lap in the front row of a room full of the most important people in mathematics, a boiler repairman who had cleaned this very building, and he was not keeping his head down. He was holding it high, and when he caught his son's eye, he did not smile. He simply nodded once, the same nod he had given in Caldwell's office 6 weeks earlier, the nod that meant say the truth out loud in the daylight where it counts. And Noah's spine straightened, and he lifted his own head, and he walked the rest of the way to the stage like a man who belonged there. Professor Richard Caldwell was waiting for him at the podium. Caldwell was in his element. He wore a suit that cost more than Noah made in 2 months. He stood with the easy authority of a man who had owned every room he had ever entered. And when Noah reached the stage, Caldwell took the microphone, and he addressed the enormous crowd with a warm, generous smile that did not touch his eyes at all. "Ladies and gentlemen," Caldwell said, "thank you all for coming. Today we have a rather unusual presenter." A ripple of laughter. 6 weeks ago, this young man who is employed on our custodial staff informed me that the framework underlying the Everett equation, the framework that appears in your textbooks, the framework that has stood for 2 decades, is fundamentally in error. Louder laughter now. He has claimed that he can succeed where 47 doctors of philosophy have failed. So, in the interest of open inquiry, we have given him the stage. Let us all give him our full and fair attention. He turned to Noah, and his smile widened, and his voice dropped just low enough that only Noah could hear it. 2 hours, boy. Let's see how long you last. He handed Noah the microphone, and he did not sit down. He walked to a seat in the front row directly beside Marcus, close enough that the two fathers of this drama, the man who had made the boy and the man who intended to destroy him, sat almost shoulder to shoulder. And Professor Dolan took the seat on Caldwell's other side. The trap was set. The two of them would attack from the front row in full view of the crowd, and they would rattle the boy until he broke. Noah stood alone at the podium holding the microphone, 2,000 people in front of him and tens of thousands more behind the camera. And for one long, silent second, he did nothing at all. And then he set down the microphone. He did not need it. He took the piece of chalk out of his pocket. The good chalk, the professor's chalk, that his father had handed to men like Caldwell for 19 years. He turned to the enormous blackboard behind him, and he began to write. He did not introduce himself. He did not thank the committee. He did not tremble or stammer or apologize for his presence the way Caldwell had been so certain he would. He simply wrote the Everett equation across the top of the board in clean, confident strokes, and then he turned back to the crowd and said the first words of his presentation, and his voice did not shake. For 15 years, Noah said, the greatest mathematicians in the world have tried to solve this equation. 47 of them. Everyone has failed. And I'm going to begin by telling you something that no one in this room wants to hear. He paused. They didn't fail because the equation is too hard. They failed because they were all lied to. And so were you. The room went dead silent. In the front row, Caldwell's smile flickered. Every attempt at this problem, Noah continued, has started from the same place, the same framework, the same foundation. And that foundation contains a single assumption that everyone in this field treats as obviously, unquestionably true. He turned and wrote it on the board. The third assumption, the boundary condition defined as fixed. This right here. Every one of the 47 built their work on top of this, and every one of them, without exception, hit a wall at the exact same point. Doesn't that strike anyone as strange? 47 of the smartest people alive, and they all break in the identical spot. That's not 47 failures. That's one failure made 47 times, because they all inherited the same crack in the same foundation, and not one of them thought to look down. This is absurd, Caldwell said loudly from the front row. He did not stand. He simply projected his voice across the auditorium, the first attack right on schedule. You're suggesting that 47 trained mathematicians, and by extension, this entire field, simply failed to notice a flaw that a custodian spotted in his spare time. Do you understand how arrogant that is? Arrogant? A murmur of agreement rolled through the crowd. This was the moment the trap was designed for, the moment the boy was supposed to falter, to shrink under the weight of authority and the disapproval of 2,000 experts. Noah did not falter. It's not arrogance, Professor, he said calmly, turning to face Caldwell directly. It's the opposite. They didn't notice the flaw precisely because they were trained. Because the first thing you learn in this field is to trust the framework, to build on the foundation, not to question it. Their training taught them where to look, and it also taught them where not to look. And nobody looks at the foundation. Nobody questions the third assumption. You know why? He let the question hang. Because it has your name on it, Professor Caldwell, and in this field, nobody questions your name. The murmur in the crowd changed its pitch. It was no longer entirely on Caldwell's side. Caldwell's jaw tightened. You flatter me. But an accusation is not a proof. You claim the assumption is flawed. Prove it, or sit down. I intend to, Noah said, and he turned back to the board. For the next 20 minutes, Noah worked. He did not rush. He built his case one step at a time, and every step was clean, and every step was solid, and the auditorium grew quieter and quieter as he went. Because the thing that was happening on that blackboard was not the fumbling of an amateur. It was mathematics of a very high order, performed from memory without a single note by a 20-year-old in a second-hand suit. He showed them the assumption. He showed them why it had seemed reasonable 20 years ago. He showed them with a generosity that surprised the room exactly why a brilliant person would have made this exact choice. And then, step by careful step, he showed them why it was wrong. Why the boundary condition could not remain fixed under the transformation the equation demanded. Why the moment you forced it to stay fixed, you introduced a hidden contradiction that would not reveal itself until many steps later at precisely the wall where all 47 had shattered. "There," Noah said, tapping the board. "That's the wall. Everyone who has ever failed at this equation failed right there. And now you can see why. It was never a wall in the equation. It was a shadow cast by a mistake made 20 steps earlier. They were all trying to break through a wall that didn't exist. The real problem was behind them the whole time in the part they'd already decided was solid, in the part they stopped checking." In the front row, Marcus Bennett went very still, because those were his words. The part they stopped checking. His son had built the heart of his argument on the wisdom of a boiler repairman, and Marcus understood it, and his eyes filled. Caldwell understood it too. And Caldwell, watching the room turn, watching 2,000 experts lean forward and begin quietly to nod, knew that his first line of defense had failed. The boy had not crumbled. The boy had gotten stronger. So Caldwell escalated. He stood up. "Enough," Caldwell said, and now his voice had lost its warm, generous tone entirely. "This is theater. You've told a nice story about a crack in a foundation, but you have shown us nothing. You've criticized. Any fool can criticize. You claim the assumption is wrong, fine, but criticism is not mathematics. If the assumption is wrong, then there must be a correct version. And if there's a correct version, then you must be able to do what no one else has done. You must be able to solve the equation. So stop pointing at other people's failures and show us a success. Solve it. Right now, or admit that all you have is an insult dressed up as insight. It was a good attack. It was in its way a fair one, and the crowd felt it, because Caldwell was right about one thing. Tearing down was not the same as building up. Noah could be completely correct about the flaw and still be unable to reach the other side. Noah looked at Caldwell for a long moment. "You're right, Professor," he said quietly. The crowd stirred. Caldwell blinked, thrown for just a second by the agreement. "You're right that criticism isn't enough," Noah went on. "You're right that I have to show you a path all the way through. And you're right that if I can't, then I'm just a janitor with an insult. So," he picked up the chalk again, "let me build it, not tear it down. Build it, from the corrected foundation all the way to the far side. And I'm going to ask every one of you, every expert in this room, to try as hard as you can to knock it down as I go. Because if you can find one gap, one broken step, then Professor Caldwell is right and I should sit down. But if you can't," he met Caldwell's eyes, "then we're all going to have a very uncomfortable conversation about how 47 people failed at a problem that was solvable the entire time." And then Noah Bennett turned to the blackboard and he began to solve the Everett equation. What followed became legend in the field. People who were in that room would talk about it for the rest of their lives. Because for the next full hour, a 20-year-old with no degree, no training, and no notes rebuilt one of the deepest problems in modern mathematics from the ground up. And he did it while the most powerful people in the world tried to tear him apart. They came at him from every direction. It was not just Caldwell and Dolan anymore. As the proof developed, other experts joined in, some hostile, some simply unable to believe what they were seeing, all of them probing for the flaw that had to be there because the alternative was too disturbing to accept. A professor from Princeton stood up and challenged his handling of a convergence condition. Noah answered before the man had finished his sentence, and the answer was so complete that the professor slowly sat back down without another word. A famous number theorist attacked the third transformation, insisting it introduced an inconsistency. Noah walked her through it, line by line, found the place where her own reasoning had gone wrong, and corrected it gently without a trace of triumph. And the number theorist, one of the most respected minds in the country, stared at the board and whispered loud enough for the microphones to catch it. "My God, he's right." Every attack made him stronger, because every attack was a chance to show that he had already thought of it. already tested it, already walked down that road 3 years ago at 2 in the morning with a mop in his hand. There was no objection they could raise that Noah had not raised against himself alone in the dark 100 times over. He had been preparing for this room for 3 years without knowing the room existed, and Caldwell watched his kingdom begin to fall. He could feel it happening. He could feel the room turning seat by seat, mind by mind. He could feel the 20 years of authority he had built draining away with every step the boy wrote on the board. And a rational man, a good man, would have seen what was coming and found a way to surrender with dignity. But Caldwell was neither of those things in that moment. He was a cornered man watching everything he had built come apart, and a cornered man does the most dangerous thing of all. He abandoned the mathematics entirely, and he went for the boy himself. "Stop," Caldwell said, rising again, and his voice cracked across the auditorium like a gunshot. "Just stop. This is a performance, and I won't allow it to continue without saying what everyone in this room is thinking, but is too polite to say." He turned to the crowd, playing to them, now desperate. "This young man has no training, no degree, no advisor. He cleans floors. And you're all sitting here pretending that he taught himself alone out of thin air to do something that has defeated the best of us for 15 years. Use your reason. It's not possible. It has never once been possible in the history of this field." He wheeled back on Noah, and now his voice was pure venom. "You memorize this. Someone gave it to you. Some rival of mine, some coward hiding in the shadows fed you this to embarrass me, and you memorized it like a parrot, and you're reciting it up there. Admit it. Admit that you stole this, because I refuse to believe. I will not believe that a custodian did what I could not." The auditorium went utterly silent. It was the ugliest thing anyone had said all day, and it was also Caldwell believed his last and best weapon, because it did not require him to win the mathematics. It only required him to plant a seed of doubt, to make the crowd suspect that the impossible thing they were watching was in fact impossible and therefore a trick. Noah set down the chalk. He was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, he did not speak to Caldwell. He spoke to the whole room, and his voice was steady, and underneath the steadiness, there was something that had not been there before. There was anger, not the loud kind. The deep, clean, patient anger of a person who has been underestimated his entire life and has finally reached the end of his patience with it. "You want to know who gave me this?" Noah said. He reached into his jacket and he pulled out something he had brought with him, something he had carried onto that stage for exactly this moment. It was a notebook. Old, battered, its cover held together with tape. He held it up so the room could see it. "I've got 100 of these," Noah said. "More than 100. They're in a supply closet in the basement of this building right now if anyone wants to go count them. 3 years of them. And you can trace every single idea in this proof back through these notebooks, step by step, dead end by dead end, all the way to the beginning. You can watch me get it wrong 1,000 times. You can watch me learn. Because nobody gave me this, Professor Caldwell." His voice rose just slightly. "I built it out of the garbage. Out of the textbooks you people threw away, out of the exams you dropped in the recycling, out of the lectures I heard through the doors while I was mopping the halls outside your classrooms. That's my advisor. A closed door and a trash can. That's the coward hiding in the shadows who fed me this." The room was frozen. "You say it's not possible that a custodian did this," Noah went on, and now he took a step toward the front row, toward Caldwell, and the whole auditorium held its breath. "You say it's never happened in the history of the field, and you're almost right. It's not supposed to be possible because people like me are not supposed to get into rooms like this. We're supposed to clean them and leave. That's the deal. That's the wall you built, Professor. And it's a lot bigger than the third assumption. It's the wall that says the truth belongs to people who can afford the tuition." His voice dropped, and it was terrible in its quietness. "But I couldn't afford the tuition. My mother got sick, and we spent everything we had, and she died anyway. And there was no money left for a boy with a mind. So I did it the only way I could. In the dark, out of the garbage. And now I'm standing on your stage, and I'm telling you that I did the impossible thing, and you can't stand it. Because if a janitor did it, then the whole wall comes down, doesn't it? Then maybe intelligence was never about the money at all." Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. 2,000 of the most powerful people in mathematics sat in absolute silence while a janitor's son told them the truth about their own kingdom. And then from the front row, a voice broke the silence. But it was not Caldwell's voice. It was Marcus. Marcus Bennett had risen to his feet. An old man in a pressed old suit, a boiler repairman who had cleaned that very auditorium 1,000 times, standing up in a room full of geniuses. And he was not looking at his son. He was looking at Richard Caldwell. "You want to know who gave him this?" Marcus said, and his voice shook not with fear, but with 19 years of swallowed pride finally coming up. "I'll tell you who gave it to him. Nobody. Nobody gave that boy a single thing his whole life. The world took from him. It took his mother. It took his college. It took every chance a kid like that is supposed to get. And he still sat in the dark every night and taught himself to be smarter than every man in this room. And you," his voice cracked, "you stood up there this morning and you laughed at him. You laughed at my son, in front of the world, and you bet my job on his failure because you were so sure a boy like mine couldn't be worth anything." He was crying now openly, and he did not care. "Well, look at him. Look at him. Everybody in this room is looking at my son right now, and they know the truth. And the only man who won't say it out loud is you. Because you knew, didn't you? You knew he was right the whole time." And there it was, out loud, in the daylight, where it counted. The accusation hung in the air, and every eye in the auditorium turned to Richard Caldwell, and the question was on 2,000 faces at once. Did you know Caldwell opened his mouth, and nothing came out? Because he could not lie, not here, not with the boy's proof standing complete on the board behind him undefeated after an hour of the fiercest attack the field could muster. Not with 100 notebooks in a basement closet that would prove every word the boy had said. Not with the whole world watching. The lie he had defended for 20 years had finally run out of room to hide. And in that silence, in that awful, endless silence while Caldwell stood with his mouth open and no words coming out, the truth revealed itself more completely than any confession could have. Everyone in the room understood. They saw it all at once. The great professor had known. He had known his framework was flawed. He had watched 47 people fail at the exact spot where his own mistake lived, and he had said nothing year after year because his name was on the wall. And now he had tried to destroy a 20-year-old boy and get his father fired, not to defend the truth, but to keep it buried. "You knew," a voice said from somewhere in the crowd, and then another, "He knew." And the whisper became a murmur, and the murmur became a rising tide, and Richard Caldwell stood alone on the floor of the auditorium he had ruled for 25 years, and felt his entire world dissolve around him. But Noah was not finished, because there was still one thing left. The proof was almost complete, but not quite. There was a final step, the last transformation. The moment where the corrected foundation carried the equation all the way across to the other side, to the answer that 47 people and 15 years had failed to reach. And Noah had saved it. He had held it back through the entire hour of attacks, through Caldwell's accusation, through his father's tears, because some part of him had known that this moment would come, and that when it did, the truth should not be spoken. It should be shown. Noah turned his back on Caldwell. He turned his back on the whole hostile front row, and he faced the blackboard, and he raised his father's chalk, and in a silence so complete you could hear the chalk touch the slate, he wrote the final transformation of the Everett equation. It was not long. That was the beautiful, devastating thing about it. After 15 years and 47 failures and 2 hours of the fiercest defense the field could offer, the final step, once the foundation was corrected, was almost simple. Almost inevitable. It was the kind of step that once you saw it, you could never unsee, and you could never understand how anyone had missed it. Noah wrote it out in a few clean lines, and then he set the chalk down in the tray, and he stepped back. The Everett equation was solved. For one heartbeat, the entire auditorium was silent, because 2,000 mathematicians were doing the same thing at the same time. They were checking it. Racing through the final step in their own minds, hunting for the flaw, the trick, the error that had to be there. And one by one, all across that enormous room, they reached the same place. They reached the end, and they found no error, because there was none. And then the number theorist from before, the respected one, stood up in the middle of the crowd, and she was not attacking anymore. She had tears on her face, and she began alone to clap. For a moment her applause was the only sound, a single pair of hands in a silent room, and then the man next to her stood and joined her, and then a whole row, and then a section. And then like a dam breaking, 2,000 of the greatest mathematicians in the world rose to their feet all at once, and the applause hit Noah Bennett like a physical wave, thunderous, overwhelming, a standing ovation from the very people who had come to watch him fail. The sound filled the auditorium and poured out through the live stream to tens of thousands more, and it did not stop, and it did not stop. And Noah stood on the stage in his mother's funeral suit, with his father's chalk dust on his hands, and let it wash over him. He looked for his father. Marcus was still standing in the front row, but he was not clapping. He was just looking at his son with a hand pressed over his mouth, weeping 19 years of being invisible, and swallowing his pride and cleaning up after men who never learned his name. All of it pouring out at once as he watched 2,000 of those same men rise to their feet for his boy. And in the middle of that roaring ovation, one man remained seated. Richard Caldwell sat alone in the front row, surrounded by a standing, cheering crowd, the only person in 2000 who had not risen. And no one was looking at him anymore. That was the cruelest part. That was the completion of his ruin. For 25 years, every eye in every room had followed Richard Caldwell. And now the boy he had tried to destroy stood in a storm of applause, and the whole world was on its feet for him, and no one, not one single person, was looking at Caldwell at all. He had become the thing he had spent his whole life making other people into. He had become invisible. The applause did not solve anything. That was the first thing Noah understood when he finally walked off that stage. The ovation had been overwhelming, and it had been real, and it had washed away 15 years of doubt in 90 seconds. But applause is a feeling, and a feeling fades. And the moment the applause ended, the machinery of the real world began to turn slowly and coldly, and Noah discovered that solving the equation was not the end of the fight. It was only the end of the beginning. Because a discovery this large could not simply be accepted on the strength of a standing ovation. Mathematics does not work that way, and it should not. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary verification. And so even as the crowd was still on its feet, the machinery started, and the first person to set it in motion was the number theorist who had wept and clapped a woman named Dr. Sandra Okafor, one of the most respected figures in the entire field. She found Noah backstage 20 minutes after he stepped down while he was still shaking, still not quite able to believe what had happened. She did not congratulate him. She did something better. She looked him in the eye and treated him for the first time in his life like a colleague. "You understand what has to happen now," she said. It was not a question. "I think so," Noah said. "It has to be verified, independently, by a committee of experts who will go through every single line of that proof for weeks, maybe months, trying as hard as they can to break it. Not because we doubt you." She paused. "Well, some of them will doubt you. But that's not why. It's because this is how it works. This is how it has to work. If it survives that, and I believe it will, then it's real. Then it's yours. Then everything changes. But it will take time, and it will not be gentle. And there are people in this field who are going to fight you every step of the way because you didn't just solve an equation today. You embarrassed a very powerful man, and powerful men do not go quietly." "I know," Noah said. "I've been cleaning up after one for 3 years. Sandra Okafor almost smiled. "Then you know more than most of the PhDs in that room." She handed him a card. "I'm going to chair the verification committee myself. I'll make sure it's fair. That's all I can promise you. Not that it'll be easy, just that it'll be fair. And in this field right now, for someone like you, fair is a rarer thing than you'd think." And so began the longest 3 months of Noah Bennett's life. The verification committee assembled within a week. 9 experts drawn from universities across the country, chosen specifically for their independence from Caldwell and his allies. They were given the proof, And they were given Noah's notebooks, all 100 and more of them, carried up from the basement supply closet in cardboard boxes, 3 years of a young man's mind laid out on a conference table for the world's experts to examine. And they attacked it. That was their job, and they did it without mercy. Every day Noah received questions, challenges, demands to justify this step or that transformation, requests to explain reasoning that he had worked out years ago at 2 in the morning and half forgotten. And Noah answered every one. He answered them from a borrowed desk in a small office the provost had quietly arranged for him because he no longer had access to the lecture halls and because he still, incredibly, was technically employed as a member of the custodial staff, a fact that became more absurd with every passing day. That was the strange suspended limbo Noah lived in during those months. During the day, he was the most talked about young mathematician in the world, defending the solution to a legendary problem against a committee of experts. And at night, 3 nights a week, he still put on his uniform and pushed his cart through the mathematics building and cleaned the floors, because the wager had never been formally resolved, because his father's job still hung in the balance, and because the Bennett family still needed the money. The greatest mathematical mind of his generation was still emptying the trash cans of the men who were at that very moment verifying his genius. Some of them found out. One night a professor working late saw Noah in the hallway with his mop and stopped and stared, unable to reconcile the janitor in front of him with the name that was electrifying the entire field. "You're—" the professor started and could not finish. "Still cleaning the floors," Noah said, not unkindly. "Yeah." The paperwork moved slowly. The professor went home that night and could not sleep because he had seen with his own eyes exactly what was wrong with the world he lived in. And the next morning he wrote a letter to the provost demanding that the university resolve Noah Bennett's employment status immediately because it was, he wrote, a disgrace to the institution that a man solving century-defining problems was still scrubbing its toilets at night. But while the verification ground forward, the counterattack began. Because Sandra Okafor had been right. Caldwell was not going to go quietly. He could not challenge the mathematics directly anymore. He had tried that publicly and been destroyed by it. So he did what cornered powerful men do. He moved to the other battlefield, the one that had nothing to do with truth. He went after the boy's legitimacy. The first attack came as a whisper campaign. Stories began to circulate. Quiet suggestions passed from office to office that there was something not quite right about the Bennett story, that it was too perfect, that a janitor teaching himself to solve the Everett equation was the kind of thing that made a wonderful headline, but that thoughtful people should be skeptical of, that perhaps there had been a mentor after all, someone unacknowledged, and that the whole heartwarming narrative was, at best, incomplete and at worst a fraud designed to embarrass a distinguished professor. Noah felt the temperature change before he understood the cause. Committee members who had been warming to him grew cautious again. The questions took on a sharper edge. And one afternoon, Sandra Okafor called him into her office and closed the door. "Someone is talking to the committee," she said bluntly. "Behind my back, feeding them doubts. I don't have to tell you who." "Caldwell," Noah said. "I can't prove it. He's too careful for that." "But yes, and it's working, Noah. Not on the mathematics. The mathematics is holding. It's beautiful. It's going to pass. But he's not attacking the mathematics. He's attacking you, the person. He's rebuilding the doubt that you're even capable of this. And here's the ugly truth." She leaned forward. "If he can make enough people believe that a janitor couldn't have done this, then it won't matter that a janitor did. They'll find a way to give the credit somewhere else, to a committee, to an institution, to anyone with the right letters after their name. It happens more than you'd like to believe. The work survives, the person disappears, and the powerful man gets to say, well, we never really knew who did it, did we?" Noah felt something cold settle in his stomach, because this was a wall he had not seen coming. He had spent 3 years preparing to prove the mathematics. He had never once imagined that he might prove the mathematics completely and still have it taken from him. "What do I do?" he asked. "I don't know," Sandra admitted. "The notebooks help. They're the best evidence you have. But he'll say you could have written them recently, backdated them. There's no way to prove exactly when they were written." She rubbed her eyes, tired. He's found the one attack you can't fully answer, Noah, the question of who you are. And the terrible thing is, the world is primed to believe him. Because deep down, most people already agree with him. Most people already believe that someone like you couldn't have done this. He's not planting a new idea. He's just watering one that was already there. Noah went home that night and told his father everything. And Marcus listened and grew very quiet. And then he said something that Noah did not expect. "He's going to lose," Marcus said. "Dad, you're not listening. He might actually." "I heard you," Marcus said. "I heard every word, and I'm telling you, he's going to lose. You want to know how I know?" He looked at his son. "Because I know something about that man that nobody in that fancy committee knows. Something I've known for a long time." Noah went still. "What are you talking about?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke it was slow and heavy, like a man setting down a weight he had carried for years. 8 years ago, Marcus said, "I was cleaning Caldwell's office one night, late, everybody gone, and the man had left his computer on and papers all over the desk, and I wasn't looking, son. I want you to understand that I never once, in 19 years, read a thing that wasn't mine to read. But I knocked a stack of papers off the desk by accident, reaching for the trash can, and I bent down to pick them up, and I couldn't help but see what was on the top page." He paused. It was a letter. To himself, almost like a note he'd written and never sent. And it said, and I've never forgotten it, it said, "The boundary condition may not hold. If I'm wrong about this, the whole framework fails. I have to decide whether to publish the correction or protect the work. God help me." The room went silent. "He wrote that 8 years ago," Marcus said. 8 years. He knew. He knew before any of those 47 people even tried. He didn't just suspect it, Noah. He wrote it down in his own hand, and then he made a choice. Protect the work, which meant protect himself. And he let all those people go on failing for years at the exact spot he already knew was broken, because his name was worth more to him than the truth. Noah could barely speak. "Why didn't you ever tell me this?" "Because it wasn't mine to tell," Marcus said simply. "It was his shame, not mine. And I'm not a man who uses another man's secrets. I put those papers back on the desk exactly how they fell, and I never spoke of it, not to you, not to your mother, not to a living soul, for 8 years. He looked at his son, and his eyes were hard and clear. "But he bet my job on your failure. He laughed at you in front of the world. And now he's trying to steal the one thing you've got, which is the truth of who you are. So I'll tell you what, son. A man's secrets are his own right up until he uses them to hurt my boy, and then they're fair game." Noah sat with that for a long, long moment, and then he shook his head slowly. "We can't use it," he said. Marcus blinked. "What? We can't use it, Dad. Think about it. It's your word against his. You saw a paper 8 years ago that doesn't exist anymore, that he'd never admit to writing. All it does is turn this into a mud fight, my father, the janitor accusing the professor of a cover-up with no proof. It makes us look desperate. It makes us look exactly like what he's trying to paint us as. People will say the Bennetts will say anything." He rubbed his face. "And worse, it makes it personal. It makes it about revenge. And the second it becomes about revenge, I lose, because then I'm just a kid with a grudge, not a mathematician with a proof." Marcus stared at his son. "So you're just going to let him?" "No," Noah said, and something sharpened in his voice. "No, I'm not going to let him do anything. But I'm not going to beat him with your secret dad. I'm going to beat him with his own. Because if he wrote that note 8 years ago, then he was already thinking about the correction 8 years ago, which means somewhere in his own published work, in his own lectures, in his own footnotes, there's a trace of it. A hedge. A moment where he almost said it out loud and pulled back. A man can't carry a doubt that big for 8 years without it leaking somewhere." He stood up, and there was a fire in him now. He's a careful man, but nobody's careful for 8 years. Somewhere in the public record, Richard Caldwell already told the truth without meaning to, and I'm going to find it. And Noah Bennett went hunting. For 2 weeks, he did the only thing he had ever known how to do. He read. He went back through 20 years of Caldwell's published work. Every paper, every book, every printed lecture, all of it available in the library he had once cleaned. He read it the way he had taught himself everything obsessively late into the night, hunting for the pattern that had to be there. He was not looking for the mathematics now. He was looking for the man. He was looking for the moment where Caldwell's private doubt had slipped just once into the public record. And in the third week, he found it. It was small. It was buried in a footnote in a paper Caldwell had published 11 years earlier, 3 years before he wrote the note Marcus had seen. A single sentence in a footnote in a paper about something else entirely. And the sentence said almost in passing that the fixed boundary condition was assumed for the present purposes, and that a full treatment of its stability under transformation remains an open question the author hopes to address in future work. A full treatment of its stability remains an open question. Caldwell had known, not 8 years ago, 11 years ago, he had known that the boundary condition's stability was an open question. He had written it down in a peer-reviewed paper in his own words in the public record where it could never be denied or destroyed. And then he had never addressed it. He had let it sit there, buried in a footnote for 11 years, while 47 people broke themselves against the exact instability he had flagged and abandoned. It was not a smoking gun. It did not prove Caldwell knew the framework was wrong, but it proved something almost as damning. It proved that Caldwell had identified the exact weak point publicly over a decade ago, called it an open question, promised to address it, and then buried it, and moved on to build his entire reputation on top of it, as though it were solid. And it was in his own published words. There was no denying it, no dismissing it as a janitor's accusation. It was Caldwell's own footnote in Caldwell's own paper with Caldwell's own name on it. Noah brought it to Sandra Okafor. He laid the paper on her desk open to the footnote, and he watched her read it, and he watched her understand. He flagged it himself, she said slowly, 11 years ago, and called it an open question, and promised to address it, Noah said, and never did. He knew exactly where the weakness was, Dr. Okafor. He told the whole field where it was, and then he spent 11 years pretending he hadn't and letting people fail there and building his name on top of it. He paused. You said he was attacking who I am. Well, this is who he is, in his own words, in the public record. And it doesn't come from my father, and it doesn't come from me, and it doesn't come from anyone he can call a liar. It comes from Richard Caldwell. Sandra Okafor sat back in her chair, and for the first time in 3 months she looked at Noah not with caution, not with the careful reserve of a committee chair protecting her neutrality, but with something like awe. You found the one thing he couldn't burn, she said quietly. You didn't attack him, you just held up a mirror made out of his own work. She shook her head slowly. Where did you learn to do that, to fight like that without ever throwing a punch? Noah thought about his father putting a stack of papers back on a desk exactly the way they had fallen, keeping another man's shame for 8 years because it wasn't his to tell. He thought about 19 years of a proud man, keeping his head down, never asking, never taking, waiting for the one moment that truly mattered. From my dad, Noah said. The footnote changed everything. It could not be whispered away. It could not be spun. It was there in black and white in a journal any of the committee members could pull off their own shelves. And once it was in front of them, the whisper campaign collapsed because the whispers had all been built on a single foundation, the idea that Caldwell was a wronged and distinguished authority being embarrassed by an unqualified boy. And the footnote destroyed that foundation completely. It revealed Caldwell not as the victim of the story, but as its architect. A man who had seen the crack 11 years ago flagged it, promised to fix it, and then buried it to protect himself. The committee's doubt evaporated, and in its place came something far more dangerous to Caldwell than doubt, came anger. Because these were serious people, people who had devoted their lives to the truth and the discovery that one of their most celebrated colleagues had knowingly let the field waste 15 years and 47 careers chasing a problem he had reason to know was misframed, that was a betrayal of everything they believed in, and they did not forgive it. The verification concluded 2 weeks later. The committee's finding was unanimous and unambiguous. Noah Bennett's solution to the Everett equation was complete, correct, and original. The proof was sound. The work was his own, as documented beyond any reasonable doubt by 3 years of dated sequential notebooks. And in an unusual step, the committee's report included a second finding, one that had nothing to do with the mathematics. It noted in careful and devastating academic language that the foundational weakness Mr. Bennett had identified had been publicly flagged by Professor Richard Caldwell himself 11 years prior, described by Professor Caldwell as an open question requiring future treatment, and subsequently left unaddressed in a manner the committee found difficult to reconcile with the professional standards of the field. It was in the polite and merciless way of academics the end of Richard Caldwell. The university launched a formal review, and the review found what Noah had found, and more. It found the pattern of a man who had known for over a decade that his celebrated framework rested on an unexamined assumption, and who had chosen again and again to protect his reputation rather than pursue the truth. It found that he had watched dozens of researchers, some of them his own students, fail at a problem he had reason to believe was misframed, and had said nothing. And it found, finally, the thing that ended him completely. It found the record of his conduct toward the Bennett family. The wager, the threat to fire a 19-year employee, the attempt to have Noah's presentation slot revoked, the whisper campaign during the verification, a pattern the review concluded of using institutional power to suppress a legitimate discovery and to punish those who threatened him. Richard Caldwell was asked to resign. He did not go to a faculty meeting to defend himself the way he had once summoned Noah to be humiliated in front of one. There was no meeting. There was only a short letter and then an empty office, and then a name quietly removed from the doors and the letterheads, and eventually from the framework itself, which the field began at Sandra Okafor's suggestion to call by a new name. The corrected framework. The one that worked. The university apologized to the Bennett family publicly, and Marcus Bennett was called into the provost's office, the same provost whose door he had knocked on in the dark, and he was not fired. He was offered a promotion to head of facilities for the entire mathematics complex, with a raise that nearly doubled his salary and a formal letter of apology for the way he had been threatened. Marcus accepted the promotion, but he asked to keep his old locker, the one he had cleaned out of for 19 years and never once been allowed to feel proud of. He wanted to keep it, he said, because now finally he could walk past it with his head up. And Noah received a phone call one ordinary afternoon from the office of the dean of the graduate school. He almost did not answer it because he was at that exact moment in his uniform, having just finished what would turn out to be the last cleaning shift of his life. He answered it standing in the hallway with his cart beside him, chalk dust and cleaning solution on his hands, and he listened, and the dean told him that the university was offering him something. Not a job on the custodial staff, not a token gesture, a full scholarship, full admission to the graduate program in mathematics, all expenses covered effective immediately, with a personal invitation to study under Dr. Sandra Okafor, who had specifically requested to be his advisor. Not because anyone felt sorry for him. The dean was very clear about that because he understood by then that pity was the one thing Noah Bennett would not accept. The offer was made, the dean said, because Noah Bennett was in the assessment of the entire department, one of the most gifted mathematicians they had ever encountered, and it would be an honor, a privilege, and frankly an embarrassment, finally corrected to have him as a student. Noah stood in the hallway with his cart in the building where he had been invisible for 3 years, and he could not speak for a long moment. "Mr. Bennett," the dean said, "are you still there?" "I'm here," Noah said. His voice was not quite steady. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "The lecture halls," Noah said. "The ones I clean. Would I be able to take classes in them in the same rooms?" There was a pause on the line, and the dean, who was a decent man and who understood at last the full weight of what he was hearing, said, "Mr. Bennett, you can take classes in any room in this university, and I suspect that before long you'll be teaching in them." Noah hung up the phone. He stood alone in the hallway for a moment, and then he did something he had wanted to do for 3 years and had never once allowed himself. He walked into the largest lecture hall in the building, the same one where Caldwell had caught him at the blackboard at 2 a.m, the same one where all of this had begun, and he did not turn on the cleaning cart. He walked to the front, he walked to the blackboard, and he picked up a piece of chalk in the daylight as a student with every right in the world to be there. And he did not write an equation. He wrote his mother's name, Ellen Bennett. just her name in the center of that enormous blackboard in the room where her son had done the impossible thing she always knew he would do. This child is going to do something in this world. She had said it when he was 7 years old at a kitchen table with a stack of thrift store workbooks and a pencil. She had not lived to see it, but she had known. She had always known. And Noah stood in front of her name in his janitor's uniform on the last day he would ever wear it, and he let himself cry alone in the empty hall for the mother who believed in him before anyone else did, and never got to see that she was right. Then he wiped the board clean, the way he had wiped 1,000 boards clean before. But this time it was different. This time it was not the janitor erasing another man's work. This time it was a mathematician clearing the board, getting ready to begin his own. 6 months later, the same auditorium that had witnessed Noah Bennett's impossible triumph filled again, but this time not to watch a janitor's son fail. This time it filled to honor him. Noah stood backstage in a graduation robe, and he could not stop staring at his own hands. 6 months ago, these hands had held a mop. Now they held a diploma. He had completed his first semester in a matter of months, testing out of course after course, because there was almost nothing they could teach him that he had not already taught himself in the dark. And the university had decided in an unprecedented move to hold a special ceremony, not a normal graduation, but a formal recognition of the young man who had solved the Everett equation, and in doing so, forced an entire field to look at itself in the mirror. He should have felt triumphant. Instead, he felt his mother's absence like a hole in his chest. Because the one person who had believed in him before, there was any reason to believe the one person who had seen this exact moment when he was 7 years old at a kitchen table was not in the audience. She would never be in any audience again. And Noah stood backstage in his robe and understood that some victories arrived too late for the people who earned them the most. Then he heard a familiar sound, the squeak of a wheel. He turned and there was his father pushing a cart down the backstage hallway. Except it was not a cleaning cart. Marcus Bennett, in his new position as head of facilities, still walked the building he loved, and old habits died hard, and he had grabbed a rolling cart to carry the folding chairs the ceremony staff needed. But for one heartbeat, seeing the silhouette of his father behind a cart with a squeaky wheel, Noah was thrown 3 years back in time, to the invisible boy and the invisible man, and the building that had never once learned their names. "Dad," Noah said, "you don't have to push carts anymore. You run this place now." Marcus looked down at the cart, and he laughed a real laugh, the kind Noah had not heard from him in years. "You know what, son, I've been pushing a cart through this building for 19 years. 19 years I did it because I had to with my head down, hoping nobody looked at me too close." He straightened up, and there was a light in his eyes. "Today, I'm doing it because I want to, because I feel like it. And let me tell you, it is a completely different thing to push a cart because you choose to in a building that finally knows your name." He patted the cart. Cart, same squeaky wheel, completely different man. And that Noah thought was the whole thing. That was everything. Nothing about the cart had changed. Everything about the man had. The ceremony began. And Noah walked onto the same stage where 6 months earlier he had faced 2,000 hostile experts with nothing but a piece of chalk. And this time, the 2,000 seats held people who rose to their feet the moment he appeared. Sandra Okafor was there, his advisor, now beaming. Gus was there, the old custodian who had begged him to apologize and save his father's job, and who had wept when he was proven wrong, and who now told anyone who would listen that he had known that kid was special from the very first day, which was not true, but which Noah let him say, because some kindnesses are better than the truth. The provost was there, the woman whose door Marcus had knocked on in the dark. And in the front row, in the same seat where he had once stood up and wept for his son, sat Marcus Bennett in a good suit with his head held high. Noah received his honor, and then he was asked to say a few words. And he stepped to the podium, and he looked out at the enormous crowd, and he found standing quietly at the very back of the auditorium someone he had not expected to see, Richard Caldwell. The former professor stood alone by the back doors in an ordinary coat. An ordinary man now no longer the most powerful name in the department, no longer anything at all in the world he had once ruled. He had lost his position, his framework, his reputation. He had every reason in the world to stay away. And yet he had come. He stood at the back half in shadow, watching the boy he had tried to destroy receive the honor he had tried to deny him. Their eyes met across the length of the auditorium, and Noah understood in that moment that he had a choice. He could name him. He could point him out to the crowd. This man who had humiliated him, threatened his father, tried to steal his life's work, and been justly destroyed for it. It would have been easy. It would have felt for about 10 seconds wonderful. 2,000 people would have turned to look at Richard Caldwell, and the ruin would have been complete. And the story would have had the ending that a certain kind of justice demanded. Noah looked at the man at the back of the room for a long moment, and then he began to speak, and he did not name him. "A reporter asked me the question a few weeks ago," Noah said. "She asked me, when did you know you could beat the greatest mathematicians in the world? And I've been thinking about that question ever since because there's something wrong with it. There's a lie hidden inside it, and I want to talk about that lie today because I think it's the most important thing I have to say." The room was silent. "The question assumes I was trying to beat someone," Noah went on, "that I was in a competition, that there was a contest between me and the professors, between the poor kid and the rich institution, and I won and they lost. And people love that version of the story, the janitor who beat the PhDs, the nobody who humiliated the experts. I've seen the headlines. I understand why people like it." He paused. "But it isn't true. I never once, in 3 years of cleaning these floors and teaching myself out of the trash, thought that I was better than the people whose classrooms I was cleaning. I never thought I was smarter than them. I want to be very clear about that. I don't think I'm smarter than anyone in this room." A murmur of surprise moved through the crowd. "Here is the only thing I ever believed," Noah said, and his voice grew stronger. "I believed that I deserved the chance to try. That's it. That's the whole thing. I never thought I was better. I just thought I belonged. I thought that a mind is a mind, whether it comes wrapped in a graduation robe or a janitor's uniform, and that it should be allowed to try. And the reason I had to do it in the dark out of the garbage for 3 years alone is that the world had decided I didn't get to try. Not because I wasn't capable, because I couldn't afford the ticket." He let that land, and then he said the thing he had come to say. "There is a boy somewhere in this country right now," Noah said, "who is smarter than me. I promise you he exists. There's a girl in some city, in some town, in some place nobody's ever heard of, whose mind could unlock things that would change all of our lives. And she is never going to get the chance because her mother got sick, or her family lost everything, or she was simply born on the wrong side of a wall that we built, and we maintain, and we pretend is natural. And that wall is not made of talent. It has never been made of talent. It's made of money, and it's made of names, and it's made of the quiet, comfortable belief that people who clean the floors couldn't possibly be brilliant, a belief that lets us walk past them every single day without ever wondering what's inside their heads." His voice caught just slightly. "I got through the wall by accident, because my father worked in a building full of discarded genius, and I was stubborn enough and lucky enough to fish it out of the trash. But luck is not a system. And I refuse to be the exception that makes everyone feel good. I refuse to be the one janitor who made it the feel-good story you tell, so you don't have to think about all the ones who didn't." The auditorium was so silent it seemed to be holding its breath. "So I'm not going to stand up here and tell you a story about beating the experts," Noah said. "I'm going to make you a promise instead. Every dollar of that prize, the $1 million for the Everett equation, is going to fund something. It's going to fund a program that finds the kids the wall was built to keep out. The ones cleaning the floors, the ones listening through the doors, the ones filling notebooks in the dark because nobody ever told them they were allowed to want more. We're going to find them, and we're going to knock a hole in the wall, and we're going to say the words that nobody ever said to me until it was almost too late. You belong here. You always belonged here. Come inside." And the auditorium came apart. It was not polite applause. It was not the careful appreciation of academics. It was 2,000 people on their feet, roaring, some of them crying, because the boy on the stage had taken the story they thought they were celebrating and turned it into a mirror and held it up to their entire world. And in the front row, Marcus Bennett stood with tears streaming down his face, clapping until his hands hurt, watching his son become, in front of the whole world, exactly the man Ellen had promised he would be. But the moment that Noah would remember for the rest of his life came after. Because as the crowd thundered, Noah looked to the back of the room to where Richard Caldwell stood alone. And he watched the former professor. And he saw something on the ruined man's face that he had not expected. He saw tears, not the tears of self-pity, something else, something that looked impossibly like relief. Because Noah had just stood in front of the entire field and pointedly, deliberately refused to name him, refused to complete his destruction, refused to make the story about revenge. And in refusing, Noah had done something to Caldwell that no punishment ever could have. He had shown him with brutal clarity the difference between them. Caldwell had spent his whole life protecting his name, and the boy he had tried to destroy had just been handed the perfect chance to destroy Caldwell's name forever, and had chosen instead to talk about children who deserved a chance. In that single choice, Noah had revealed everything that Caldwell had never been, and everything he might have been if he had only at some point in his long and celebrated career cared about the truth more than he cared about himself. Caldwell met Noah's eyes across the roaring room one last time, and he did something that no one else saw, that no camera caught, that existed only between the two of them. He nodded. Once, the same nod that Marcus had given his son in Caldwell's own office 6 months earlier. The nod that means you were right, the nod of a defeated man acknowledging finally and only to the one person who had earned it the truth he had spent his entire life running from. And then Richard Caldwell turned and pushed open the doors and walked out of the building he had ruled for 25 years and out of Noah's story forever. He was not punished further. He did not need to be. He had to live the rest of his life as a man who had held genius in his hands and thrown it in the trash, and who had been shown mercy by the very person he tried to destroy. And there is no punishment in the world heavier than that. The program that Noah built with the prize money is still running today. It found the girl in the town nobody had heard of. It found the boy cleaning the floors. It found dozens of them, and then hundreds minds that the wall had been built to keep out, and it knocked holes in the wall one child at a time. Some of them are professors now themselves. One of them, a young woman whose mother had cleaned hotel rooms for a living, recently solved a problem that had stood open for 40 years. And when they asked her how she did it, how a girl from nowhere, with no advantages accomplished what trained experts could not, she gave the answer she had learned from the program that found her the answer that had been passed down to her from a janitor's son who learned it from his father in a lecture hall at 5 a.m. She said the truth always hides in the part everyone stopped checking, including the truth about who's allowed to find it. Years passed. Noah Bennett became a professor. He taught in the same lecture halls he had once cleaned, and students who walked through the mathematics building at M1T would sometimes stop at Lecture Hall 7, the largest one, the one where a professor had once caught a janitor at the blackboard at 2 a.m, and they would notice a small framed square hanging on the wall by the door. It was a piece of an old blackboard cut out and preserved behind glass, and on it, in a young man's handwriting, was written a single sentence: "Talent does not ask where you come from. It only asks if you are willing to work." And below that sentence, most people never noticed there was a second line smaller written in a different hand, an older hand, a father's hand. Because when they cut that piece of blackboard out to preserve it, Marcus Bennett had asked if he could add one thing, and they let him. And what he wrote beneath his son's words was this: "For Ellen, who always knew." Marcus Bennett lived to see his son become everything Ellen had promised. He worked as head of facilities until the day he retired, and on that day the mathematics department threw him a celebration larger than any they had ever thrown for a departing professor, because by then everyone in that building knew exactly who Marcus Bennett was, and exactly what he had raised, and exactly what the world had almost thrown away. He sat in the front row of his own celebration, with his head held high, an old man who had spent 19 years being invisible and the rest of his life being seen, and when they asked him to say a few words, he stood up and he looked at his son sitting beside him, a professor now, and he said only one sentence. He said, "I never fixed anything as important as him," and then he sat down because Marcus Bennett was not a man who wasted words, and because that one sentence contained his entire heart. Noah Bennett still has the piece of chalk, the good chalk. The professor's chalk his father pressed into his hand the night before the conference. The chalk that had been handed to powerful men for 19 years before it was finally used to write something none of them could. He keeps it on his desk in a small glass case, and he looks at it before every lecture he gives. Not because he needs the reminder, but because he never wants to forget the boy who cleaned these floors, and the father who believed in him, and the mother who saw it all before anyone else did, and the simple world-changing truth that the three of them proved together against a man who had every advantage and used them all to be wrong. A powerful man can spend his whole life building walls, but it only takes one person with courage and one piece of chalk and one father's quiet faith to open a door that stays open forever. And Noah Bennett, the janitor's son, who solved what 50 PhDs could not, walks through that door every single morning into a room full of students the world once told to keep their heads down, and he says the only words that ever really mattered. You belong here. You always did. Now pick up the chalk and get to work.